George Lucas is an old friend. I had gone to film school with him, and Gloria Katz, my wife / writing partner, and I had written American Graffiti with him. So, we felt very comfortable, and this was another collaboration.
After American Graffiti, George had said that he had found this comic book about a duck from outer space that lands in Cleveland. And he said it was just, he thought it was very funny, and he thought it was kind of very film noir with this absurdist element. And we sort of forgot about the idea. But then by the sort of early 80s, we began to think, well, maybe there is, as ridiculous as this idea sounds, maybe there is something that would be very entertaining in this film and very unusual.
I think the attraction was that it was going to be entertaining and fun and sort of off the wall. I mean, it was very different than the things we had been working on previously. So we looked forward to that.
Are you ready for an incredible story?
Help somebody, help!
This is obviously no place for an intelligent, sensitive duck.
Well, Steve Gerber, we met with him and talked to him about the comic book and how he saw Howard's journey on Earth. And, he had a very unique sense of humor.
So Gloria and I sat down and started working on stories. Actually, the original story that we came up with was Howard in Hawaii, because we thought it'd be sort of fun to shoot there.
And we didn't really want to explain why Howard ended up on Earth. But, everybody in the movie business being very literal, you have to start from Duckworld, explain what happened to Howard. And we sort of were resistant to that, but we had no choice.
So we actually went back and rewrote it. We actually used quite a bit of the original story of how Howard arrived from the Steve Gerber comic. And there was always sort of goofy humor, and there was a love story, and yet there would be suspenseful, darker elements too. So we incorporated all of those, and it was a juggling act.
Listen!
Huh?
You got someplace to go?
Hey, if I had someplace to go, I certainly wouldn't be in Cleveland.
Casting Beverly was interesting because I think we looked at every young woman, every young actress, dancer, singer, because she was in this group Cherry Bomb, which is a group we had to put together. So we did a lot of casting. We saw a lot of beautiful girls.
I remember I was running around at thrift stores trying to buy stuff to audition with so that I could look like a cross between Madonna and Cyndi Lauper. I remember trying so hard to find rosaries and weird jewelry and everything for my big audition at Willard and Gloria's house for Beverly Switzler.
Well, we loved Leah in Back to the Future, and George really loved Leah also. And we thought that Leah personally has a great sense of humor.
When I got the part, they sent me a bunch of the comic books, which I thought were hilarious and really funny and irreverent. And I read the script. It was a very, very, very hot project at the time. I beat out a lot of girls. I mean, plus I got to play a rock star, which was really fun.
Part of the casting process was to get young women who looked like they would be in a group and could play instruments and so forth. And Leah actually learned to do it.
I really wasn't a singer, and I had to work really hard. They worked me every single weekend, and they kept threatening me that they might not let me really do the singing. Even halfway through the shooting, I don't think they were entirely convinced whether they were going to keep my voice, and they did. And I was a dancer. I grew up as a ballet dancer, so the dance part was fun and easy, except I had a very, very heavy guitar that I had to play, and it kept bashing me in the leg.
Hickory dickory dock. He ain't about to be plucked.
Tom Dolby was great. He was our music director, and he worked with the group, and he put together a group that I thought was good.
He did sort of avant-garde rock and roll, and so he was there almost the whole time helping us do the musical score and helping choreograph all the movements.
Listen to me, small visitor. I can explain how you got here.
Jeffrey Jones, of course, is a great character actor. We had seen him in Amadeus and thought he would be fantastic in this role. He had a lot of range.
You know, for me, playing the part that I played, which was really two different people, but inhabiting the same body, the kindly scientist, kind of distant Dr. Jennings, and the dark overlord of the universe who inhabited his body. It was great fun, because it did actually have an arc and a development, and plus the fact it was very extreme, so I loved being the Dark Overlord of the universe, who, incidentally, Willard referred to as the dirty underpants of the universe.
You think that's funny, Jennings?
I'm not Jennings anymore. The transformation is complete. I am now someone else.
Jeffrey was, I think, an inspired choice, and he was really into it. He worked on the voice. He was very concerned about how the monster would evolve. And it was difficult because, again, when you shoot out of sequence, he's always thinking, what part of my transformation am I in?
Yes, soon the Dark Overlords will engulf the earth.
Tom and Barry Berman, who were the makeup artists, we talked with Willard and Gloria, and they came up with a progression of looks when the appliances would change shape and get more pronounced. And there were teeth, and there were lenses, and a wig. And as far as the progression was concerned, it's just acting.
I want to see your license, Jack.
I have no license. I am not Jack.
The terrible thing was my daughter was about 4 years old, and we wanted her to come to the set. And every time she saw Jeffrey, she would start to scream and cry and get hysterical. And Jeffrey really, really felt bad.
It was pretty terrifying to see him in makeup eating lunch. It was something.
She took my eggs.
God. Listen, everybody. This is it. I've just seen it. It's in there.
Tim Robbins, we discovered in auditions.
It's nothing! It's nothing! Never mind! Carry on, Doctor.
And Tim really understood the script, understood how silly and absurd it was going to be. And he was just a kid out of UCLA. And, you know, I thought, this is a really, really gifted actor.
Howard!
People knew that there was this guy who was up and coming, and he came in and gave a great reading. And for Tim, because he hadn't worked on so many movies, it was a little bit harder because he was obviously, as all actors are, anxious and trying to do his best. And he really worked very hard and was very concerned that he was doing a good job.
Howard, can you burn a hole through this with some kind of eye laser?
I just remember having a lot of fun with him. He's a great guy, and I was really happy to have spent all that time with him. He's so tall and strong. I remember he could go like this with me. He could like push me, like press me. He was very strong. You wouldn't think he is so strong.
Look at this wonderful exhibit. It's so lifelike and realistic.
Bug off!
The other thing that we had talked to George for years about, should we do this live action or should we animate it? And we really wanted to animate it. But Universal needed a picture for that summer, and there's no way, you know, you need years and years to do an animated picture. So George said, well, we can build the duck, we can do it with the technology that we have.
In those days, you didn't have CGI as much. So we were left with using puppets and doubles in Howard the Duck costumes.
So we're building various ducks, and the ducks are constantly exploding or losing feathers, or the proportions of the duck are wrong, and we had very, very little prep time.
This does not bode well.
I regret that the technology wasn't as far as it should have been, and we realized that right away. The first day, I think at that time it was really more of a puppet. It was actually somebody who had things inside of Howard, and so we're shooting, and suddenly Howard opens his mouth and his whole neck opens, and it's like the Terminator. You see the inside of, and we're just, everybody's silent because, you know, it's a disaster.
And then we thought, oh my God, this is going to take the rest of our lives. And that's what George said too. He said, we always start out with puppets, and then we think, oh God, this is horrible. Just put him in a suit.
And Howard got better. The head got better, and the puppeteers were better, and the little people were... We'd reshoot it. We'd say, okay, we've got half an hour. Let's do that scene where he says X. We'd put Howard back in again, put a background behind him, no matter where we were. And we were constantly reshooting, trying to get Howard to be better all the time.
You know, this is beginning to seriously undermine my self-esteem.
In order to cast Howard, we had essentially a person who was devoted only to going around the country to find little people and to give them essentially acting tests and tests to see how they would move. And we found a very gifted 12-year-old kid who was very, very inventive. But a child really had too much trouble with the claustrophobic nature of the suit, and it just became too difficult. So then we had the stand-in duck, which was Ed, and Ed had just a wonderful personality, would do anything possible to make something work, and so we ended up really shooting the majority of the material with him.
Talk about an identity crisis.
Yeah, I remember my first audition for Howard the Duck. Universal Studios had contacted me, and I went in, and they were pleasant. How are you? Da-da-da. And it was more physical. It wasn't an acting audition. It was, can you jump? Can you run? Can you tumble? And I was very agile then, and I said, well, thank you. Nice, no problem. Nice to see you. And you're waiting for the response, and then I get a letter stating that I was too tall. I'm 3 feet 4 inches tall, and they were looking at that time for 3'2" or under. And then called me back, and then they wanted to consider me for a stunt double or understudy for a person that they had found. I was kind of like the backup, and then eventually took over the role.
The boy, who I think was 12, it was very difficult. The shooting conditions were really hard, so to wear this thing all day was hard. Plus, you're limited in the hours. You'd have to have schooling, and he could only be on the set for a certain amount of hours.
And then so I would shoot at night for him. I would do the stunts and stuff. Then the editor was saying he's having problems matching, where I would talk like a man. I would put my hands and cigar, and just, that's the way Howard was. And the other kid would get up, he'd walk away, he'd just be very buoyant. He's a child.
Plus, I was supposed to be in love with him, so I was much happier when Ed was in there because Ed was sweet and he worked really, really, really hard. And it was just easier to get through the day and imagine that I was in love with this duck when it was Ed.
We also had a young woman, a little person, who did stunts. And she was really sort of this stunt woman doing Howard. So it was a combination of a lot of different things. And it was like the man in the Iron Mask. They had to wear this helmet.
I think it was like one of the first fully self-contained animatronic suits, meaning it wasn't connected by hardwire. The motors were in the head, the cables ran up my back, I wore a battery belt, and it was all remote control.
And then we had a bank, I think, of 4 different puppeteers who were using little joysticks, and one person was only concerned about the eyes when they blink, when they look right and left. Somebody would be doing the mouth and so forth. And it was a nightmare of coordination. I mean, they really had to know and rehearse and so forth what they were doing.
Sometimes we'd be shooting and the duck would just, the face would just start going, and they'd go, a plane is going over, or someone's using their garage door opener. And the worst thing was that they would do the duck's close-up before mine. I was like, dude, I'm the leading lady. Can't you do me before the duck? No.
Ed Gale, even though he was wearing this costume, really became Howard the Duck. And he took it very seriously. He worked as an actor. He wasn't just a guy in a little suit.
My only vision was through the mouth, and obviously only when it was open. And then we also discovered I had a natural talent of memory and knowing where I'm at when I can't see. I just had the sense of knowing where I was. And then a lot of times we would rehearse, I would rehearse backwards. So if I had to walk up to you 10 steps, I would walk backwards 10 steps. And then on action, walk forward 10 steps.
Make yourself at home?
Make myself at home? I wish.
And of course, it was equally odd because there was really no voice. I mean, the voice of Howard was added later.
What?
I don't need any more of your sympathy, your charity.
When it came to dialogue and reading the script, I think we tried for a minute for me to actually speak and do the dialogue. It was hard to hear me. It was muffled, and the director was like, okay, don't talk. And eventually what they did was the lead puppeteer was Tim Rose, and they gave him a microphone and a miniature speaker off the side, and he would do the dialogue.
You know, and those suits are hot and claustrophobic, and you have all those gears running.
You know, you'd see little Howard sitting there between takes, and they'd have a hair dryer stuffed in his bill to keep him cool.
It was quite a trial. Ed was a real trooper. He really was great. It was very difficult to get in and out of the suit, so he had to be in it for a long time, and, you know, you couldn't go to the bathroom, so you had to hold it.
Going to the bathroom was interesting. It was really funny, though. It's a lot like football players. They sweat so much, you never have to go, because if you're drinking and sweating, it never hits your kidneys, you know? So I never really had to go, and I didn't think about that for, like, weeks into the show, and I'm like, hey, I don't go to the bathroom, do I? Drinking lots of Gatorade.
You think I might find happiness in the animal kingdom, Ducky?
Like they say, Dal, love's strange. We could always give it a try.
When it came to the love scene, we decided to try to make it seem like, oh my God, this is going to become a sex scene. And he starts getting very nervous, like, wait a minute, is this really going to happen? And that's when he's not able to control himself and his head feathers go up, which took months of technological stuff to get his head feathers to go erect. But it was fun. I mean, not every day on this movie was fun. That day was actually one of the more pleasant ones.
I've got a headache. And I got the aspirin.
We pushed all those sort of sexual connotations, but people were really upset with it at the time because they kept saying, oh, who is this film for, children or adults? And I would say, well, it's for anyone who finds it amusing.
This is not what you think. We're just very good friends.
Well, I have a very off-center kind of sense of humor, so I appreciated the whole idea of having a love scene with a duck. I thought it was hilarious.
Must be mating season.
We deliberately said, okay, this is based on a color comic book, and the two people who really contributed to the 80s comic book look were Peter Jameson, who was the production designer, who did fantastic sets using primary colors, and Richard Klein, who was the director of photography and who had done a lot of movies and was really a rock in the midst of the worst situations. You know, I could always depend on Richard because he had been through worse situations before. Joe Tompkins, who did the costumes, did a great job. I mean, Cherry Bomb, the girls' group, is very 80s, and we had punks and the whole scene in the nightclub in the beginning.
Go on in, Frankenweenie. We finally found you a date.
We had beautiful costumes. I still have them, and we had a beautiful costume house because they had to make all the duck costumes, so they spent the big bucks.
It's my fault. I got a shoplift at the Little Tyke section of Goodwill.
I'm still upset about my hair in Howard the Duck because I should have worn a wig. It took about, 2 hours a day, and she'd crimp it, and it would smoke, and I don't even know how I have a hair on my head left.
Creating Duckworld was interesting, and we had to imagine, well, aside from it being populated with ducks instead of people, what would it be like and what would the scale be? So Peter Jameson, had a whole thing figured out, well, if a table's this size. And so throughout the film, we would shoot different segments of Duckworld.
Wow!
Which also meant that we had a team of little people. Fortunately, George has made a lot of movies with little people, so they had a whole list of available little people, and they were always great and always around, and that was fun.
Casey, did you hear something?
Being on the set, we could see more, because the camera would maybe just do a quick pan, but I was able to sit there and read all of, oh my God, the book's titles. I mean, they were so detailed, even the money. The crew members on that film, they're just so detail-oriented, knowing the camera's only going to see a quick second of it, and they pulled puns on everything. What was the Playboy was Play Duck? Yeah. And that part was funny. I love that whole setup. It was fun.
He's sitting in his chair in his living room on his planet.
What is going on here?
And suddenly the chair takes off and he's blasted through walls and out into space. A lot of that was actually done practically. And the chair was on a wire and he would be pulled across a miniature room, and the wires were there. So they would take those shots and put them in the computer and take the wires out. Well, in those days, it was a big deal. Nowadays, they do it on television every day. I mean, it's not a big deal. So it really was right on the cusp of technology changing.
The scene in the restaurant when the ketchup blows up and all that, they built that set, and we were there for a month. It's really hard to be funny when you've done every angle, including the ketchup's POV. When they got to the ketchup's POV, I was like, no! You know, it's hard to tell a joke that many times.
Yes, my boyfriend! That's disgusting.
We recreated a diner on a soundstage, and the sushi bar scene is also interesting because it is sort of a history of special effects. You've got practical special effects, which are bar stools flying into the air and squibs and air cannons to blow windows, and that's all done in the old-fashioned, the special effects guys who are great. And then on top of that, you have ILM then taking that and putting in visual effects along with the practical special effects.
Underneath all the plates and everything, there were like little air jets, and they had to go off in sequence when things would blow up.
Get the point, Jenny.
The problem is when you use special effects and they do not work, you're losing so much valuable time and have hundreds of people standing around. Very, very difficult to plan for it because it's going to do something that you really can't control.
Prepare for takeoff!
The other sequence, which actually almost became a second movie being shot simultaneously, was the Ultralight sequence, in which Phil, the Tim Robbins character, and Howard end up in an ultralight flying through Petaluma, which is actually where they shot American Graffiti. So it was sort of a return to the main street of Petaluma. But that was a massive sequence because it was a real ultralight.
Howard, pull up! Pull up!
The ultralight sequence was just really designed by Joe Johnston, and not only being dangerous in that they actually flew it, but just the whole coordination and the crew and everything that went into it was just monumental.
Howard, pull it up!
Eventually, we had 3 units going. Everybody's familiar with first and second unit. We had a third unit going because, again, time was running.
The final climactic sequence was shot in a huge naval installation in San Francisco. So we took the whole building over and built the astronomy lab, and, you know, happened to be shooting when it was absolutely freezing. So it was like being in a cold ice chest, the whole sequence.
All right, turn me into a dark overlord. I'll still spit in your wormy face.
Oh, I was so sick. And I was laying on the table tied down, and my dress was like all ripped off, and they would like throw a blanket on me between takes. I was coughing. I was like, you know, it took a whole month.
In the last sequence, when the Dark Overlord finally becomes a creature, a huge monster, we had Phil Tippett, who was the master in this area, build it. Today, I don't think they would do that. He built it the same way Ray Harryhausen and so forth had worked on so many movies. They would start with clay, and the little clay model would get more and more sophisticated.
You just hope that when you're going, that they really put in a big monster with his tongue going like this, you know.
Phil Tippett really took over the design of that monster, and I mean, he made the sequence so much better.
We had the big concert scene at the end where Howard finally goes on stage, and it was shot in a big auditorium in San Francisco. And Tom Dolby and George Clinton had come up with this really great, funky Howard the Duck sort of theme song that we got to do at the end. So it was like, doing our own little rock concert with Howard.
They call him Howard the Duck. No way to conceal it.
What I also remember is I never got a day off, because my days off would be spent working on the choreography, learning the guitar, and recording. We had to record all that music before we shot it.
I enjoyed it. I got to do a little dancing, got to move, and again, it was different. I was younger, I was more agile. Of course, Thomas Dolby, he had a special guitar made for me, and I still have it today. So I got to rehearse with that one a lot. Again, now they bring in a dance choreographer to teach me how to dance and teach you how to do a concert, throwing the pick out, and doing the whole bit.
Not bad for a duck from outer space.
You were great, Ducky.
The last shot in the movie, the idea there is that their relationship builds and continues.
I had a crazy couple of years, because in Back to the Future I was supposed to be in love with my son, and then in Howard the Duck I was supposed to be in love with the duck. I was very confused.
The idea was that there was going to be a future for them and for perhaps the movie. Maybe there'd be a sequel. Of course, it never happened. But we like to think that Howard and Beverly stayed together.